If you constantly feel behind, even when you're productive, this is probably why. You're not overwhelmed by tasks. You're overwhelmed by decisions you haven't closed. Your brain is still holding conversations you haven't finished having. You're doing the work, you're showing up, but there's this low-level mental noise that never quite shuts off. Something you keep meaning to figure out. Something you know you'll need to decide, just not right now. And so it stays open.
That feeling doesn't mean you're unfocused or disorganized. It means you're carrying too many unresolved decisions at once. Not decisions you're actively working on, but decisions your brain refuses to let go of. Every open decision quietly pulls on your attention, even when you're not consciously thinking about it. That's exhausting, and it's why productive days still don't feel settled.
There's one decision Type A women consistently avoid. Not because they don't know what to do, but because making it feels uncomfortable. It requires choosing, closing a door, or admitting that something doesn't get attention right now. So instead, the decision stays open. And as long as it stays open, everything feels heavier than it needs to be.
Your brain is really good at holding things, just in case. But it's terrible at resting when too much is pending. Every unresolved decision keeps a background tab open. And when you have too many tabs running, nothing feels finished, even when progress is real. This is why effort alone doesn't create relief.
Most Type A women assume the pressure means they need better systems, more time, or more discipline. But the real issue is that too many decisions are still active. You haven't decided them. You haven't decided them, and you haven't decided not to decide them either, so they stay in limbo. Let's make this practical in business. You might be carrying decisions like, should I pivot this offer? Should I hire help? Should I change my pricing? Should I rebuild my website? Should I try a totally different strategy? You're not actively deciding these, but your brain keeps revisiting them. Every work session is split between today's tasks and tomorrow's choices.
That split focus slows execution and increases stress because part of your energy is constantly scanning the horizon instead of finishing what's in front of you. Here's the shift most people miss. You don't need to decide everything. You need to decide which decisions are not active right now.
For example, instead of thinking, I need to figure out hiring, you decide, I'm not revisiting hiring until June. That's not procrastination, that's closure. Your brain knows it can stop checking it now.
This shows up just as strongly in your life. Decisions like, should we change our routine? Should I be doing more with my time? Should I say yes to this commitment? Should I handle this differently? None of these require answers today, but because no decision has been made, they stay mentally open.
And this is exactly why rest doesn't feel restful. Your body may slow down, but your brain doesn't. It's still running scenarios, still evaluating, still holding pressure. Now compare that to deciding, we're keeping things as they are for the next 30 days. Nothing magical changed, but your brain finally got a boundary, and boundaries create relief. Hustlers avoid this decision by keeping everything active. If something matters, it gets attention. If there's urgency, it rises to the top. Hustlers assume responsibility means engagement. In business, they keep multiple projects moving instead of choosing one outcome to drive. In life, they stay mentally on all the time because nothing has officially been deprioritized.
For hustlers, the shift is deciding what does not get effort this season, even if it feels uncomfortable to let it sit. Overplanners avoid this decision by keeping options open. They want more clarity, more information, more certainty before committing. In business, they keep researching tools or strategies instead of choosing one and moving forward. And in life, they hold multiple possible plans in their head instead of selecting one.
Overplanners don't need more insight. They need decision deadlines. Thinking needs an endpoint, or it becomes a mental weight. Avoiders avoid this decision by postponing it entirely. Choosing feels risky. What if it's wrong? What if it creates pressure or disappointment? In business, they delay choosing a direction because commitment feels heavy. And in life, they avoid conversations or changes because the emotional cost feels too high.
Avoiders don't need permanent decisions. They need small, temporary ones, decisions that create movement without feeling final. Here's the framework that simplifies everything. Every decision falls into one of three categories. 1. Decide. Just make the call. 2, defer, decide when you'll decide. Or 3, discard, decide it doesn't matter.
Most type A women skip that step number 2. They either try to decide everything now or leave everything open. Defer is the missing move. When you decide when a decision will be revisited, your brain can finally release it.
When fewer decisions are active, execution improves, focus sharpens, and work feels lighter.
And happiness improves because your brain finally gets relief. You stop rehearsing outcomes and start being present. Progress doesn't come from carrying everything, it comes from choosing what counts right now. If things feel heavy, scattered, or mentally loud, it's not because you're failing. It's because there are still too many decisions that are open.
Once you understand how your type A pattern avoids decision closure, the fix becomes obvious and surprisingly simple.
If you want to see which pattern you default to and where your decisions are getting stuck, start with the Type A quiz. If you're a Type A woman, prioritization probably feels like something you should already be good at. You're organized, you make lists, you plan ahead, you know what needs to be done. And yet, everything feels important. Everything feels like it counts. So even when you prioritize, the pressure doesn't really go down. You just rearrange your stress.
That's because prioritization isn't actually about choosing what to do first. For Type A women, the real problem is deciding what doesn't deserve ongoing attention. Most advice assumes you're struggling because you can't decide what matters. And that's not true. You care about too many things, and no one ever taught you how to filter responsibility without guilt.
For Type A women, prioritization gets tangled up with identity. You don't just see tasks, you see outcomes, people, and consequences. When something needs to be done, it feels personal. Ignoring it feels irresponsible. Letting it slide feels like failure. So instead of prioritizing, you carry everything mentally and hope capacity magically expands.
And that's why common advice like just pick 3 priorities doesn't land, because your brain immediately responds with, but what about all these other things that still matter? Type A women don't struggle with awareness, they struggle with permission. Permission to decide that some things matter but don't get to count right now.
This is the distinction that changes everything. Something can be important without counting. Important means it has value. Counting means it actually deserves your time, energy, and focus right now. When Type A women feel behind, it's usually because they're treating everything that's important as if it counts equally.
But your brain can't carry unlimited counts. When everything counts, nothing ever feels finished. Prioritization isn't about denying importance. It's about deciding where your limited cognitive energy actually belongs. And that decision has to be made intentionally, not emotionally.
This is where Type A patterns really show up. Hustlers tend to prioritize based on obligation. If someone needs something, it rises to the top. If there's urgency, it wins. Hustlers equate responsibility with priority, so they end up serving everything equally and burning out in the process.
Overplanners prioritize based on optimization. They want to choose the best option, the most efficient path, the smartest order of operations, so they delay choosing until they feel certain. But while they're waiting, everything stays open in their head, and that lack of decision becomes the source of stress.
Avoiders prioritize based on emotional comfort. Tasks that feel unclear, heavy, or high stakes get pushed aside, even if they matter. Meanwhile, small or easier tasks get attention because they feel manageable. That creates a cycle where the most important work never quite gets addressed.
This is why telling Type A women to do less doesn't help. You don't need to care less, you need to decide differently. Without a filtering system, doing less just creates anxiety because the unchosen tasks don't disappear. They stay in your head, waiting.
Real prioritization isn't reduction, it's direction. It's choosing what deserves focus and allowing the rest to exist without constant attention. When that distinction isn't clear, your brain stays in a constant state of vigilance, even on productive days.
Effective prioritization for Type A women starts with a different question. Not what's most urgent and not what feels heavy, but what actually moves an outcome I'm responsible for. That shift alone removes a huge amount of unnecessary pressure.
Instead of ranking tasks, you filter them. You decide which outcomes matter this season, which ones matter later, and which ones don't belong to you at all. When an outcome isn't active, related tasks stop counting. They're still important, but they're parked, not carried. For hustlers, prioritization means separating impact from obligation. Just because you can do something doesn't mean it counts. Hustlers need to decide in advance what outcomes they are responsible for and let everything else be someone else's problem, even if it's uncomfortable.
For overplanners, prioritization means choosing decisions over preparation. You don't need more information, you need closure. Overplanners stay productive by finalizing decisions sooner and trusting that clarity will come from action, not more thinking.
For avoiders, prioritization means clarity before comfort. The goal isn't to avoid pressure, it's to reduce ambiguity. Avoiders move forward when tasks are clearly defined, time-bound, and limited. When the first step is obvious, the resistance drops.
Here's a simple test. If this task disappeared today, would it materially affect an outcome you're responsible for? If the answer is no, it doesn't count, at least not right now. That doesn't make it unimportant. It just means it doesn't deserve your mental energy today.
This is how you stop feeling behind. Not by catching up, but by narrowing the field. When fewer things count, progress becomes visible. Completion starts creating relief again.
Prioritization isn't about becoming less capable or less committed. It's about choosing where your capability actually gets used.
You don't need to do less of everything. You need to stop letting everything count equally.
When you decide what truly matters and allow the rest to wait, productivity stops feeling like pressure and starts feeling like progress.
Several months ago, we launched the Type A Circle, which is a community for Type A women. Building this community has been very fun. We've learned a ton, but most importantly, we've grown ourselves. Let's talk a little bit about how this community works and what's expected if you want to join.
So within the community, we have weekly office hours and we have weekly check-ins along with a place to hold your 90-day goals. So our vision for this, or our hope for this community, is to give women who are driven, are goal-oriented, and sometimes don't find a natural fit in other networking groups or in other masterminds, a safe place to be both driven, goal-oriented, high-achieving, and acknowledge the ways that sometimes they are constrained even with those strengths. So we've given a place for all of those things, but we've also made it very structured, which works for our own personalities as well as the women who are in our community, right? So we have a coffee chat, but we don't have 7 types of coffee chat, right? And then we have a goals and check-in, which is a place to post your 90 days as well as your weekly. And that for me, outside of office hours, because I love the engagement with everyone in the community, but the goals and check-ins for me has actually been the thing that I found to be the most valuable. Every week on Tuesdays, we've got a post that's like, we have a check-in. What did you get done last week? Even if it's a small win, and revisiting sometimes those things that you've forgotten, like, oh yeah, I did get that done. And then what's coming up this week, and how can, are you stuck? How can we support you? And that's been my absolute favorite part.
One thing that I think is important in the community is those weekly office hours. And the structure of those is pretty simple. We get on live for between 30 and 45 minutes. Once a month, we actually teach a lesson, something that will impact your business, help your productivity, help you structure something. And the other 3 Tuesdays a month, if there's 3 in the month, I guess, the other Tuesdays in the month, we basically check in, see how it's going, talk about frustrations, progress, and I think the biggest thing is celebrating the wins. I think often as Type A high achieving women, we don't spend enough time celebrating our wins. We see it as another box checked and we move on. So those Tuesdays give us a chance to celebrate our own wins and celebrate the wins of people in our community.
One of the things that we've recently added in that has been such a win is in office hours, if a conversation gets started or a question is asked that we can provide more context for with a little bit more time, is we've added more like workshops in. So recently we had a member of the community ask a question about her email list. Well, email happens to be one of Tony's core competencies. She spent a lot of time building email lists, specifically in the e-commerce space. And so 2 weeks later, Tony came in and did a full workshop on email, building your list, what it's good for, how to keep your list clean, how to optimize it, like all these things. And everybody in the community could come and ask questions and dig in deeper. So it has become this like show up, we're having conversations. If we get questions that we feel like we can add a lot more value with a designated time for, we do that. And with people coming in, it's really fun because the conversation then gets really personal around everybody's specific questions from within their own businesses.
The other nice thing about these office hours is that we know you're busy. You might not be able to show up live, but these are all recorded and they sit in the community. So if you weren't able to see the whole thing, or you had to join in the middle, or maybe you weren't able to join at all that day, you can always watch the replay. And then, of course, the community is there for you to ask questions, get clarification, or just share something you're working on this week.
Things that I'm really looking forward to as we expand on Tuesday check-ins specifically is right now we are a tight-knit group. Everybody so far has been like, I'm not currently stuck, but we are a group of problem solvers and figure outers, so to speak. And so I'm actually really looking forward to people coming in and being like, this is where I'm stuck, right? Like, what can we do? And seeing how the community comes together and helps kind of like workshop and solve those issues like for people within the community.
The other thing that we found when we've been in other communities is that a lot of them really stick to one type of business. So you're in e-commerce, you're a content creator, you're a CEO. And for type A, it's really about businesswomen, founders, whether you are currently a CEO of your company, whether you've exited your company, whether you're working to become one of those things, you're welcome in the community.
You know, we joke about this, but I know you know this, but when I married my husband, one part of our vows was in W-2 or 1099. And I think it's obviously amusing to me, but it also like applies in this community, right? Because a lot of times we get people who are like, well, what if I don't work for myself? What if I'm in a corporate job? I'm in a W-2. And it's not about where you're at, regardless if you're in e-commerce or digital content creation or whatever ecosystem you're in. It's the personality type, right? Because we all have those same, between the archetypes and being type A, we have the same processes regardless of where we're at seasonally in our careers and regardless of where we're at within the type of work that we do.
So if you're a female and you're type A, you're welcome. And if you're not sure if you're type A, or if you're not sure what your type A archetype is, or you have no idea what we're talking about right now, take the type A quiz. It'll tell you if you're type A, what your archetype is, and it'll actually share with you a lot of the strengths and a lot of the struggles you might have and help you work through them.
Let me guess. You've tried to do less. You've told yourself you're going to simplify, cut back, stop overcommitting. Maybe you even made a list of the things you were going to drop this week. And for about 5 minutes, it felt really good. Lighter, more manageable, like maybe this time was actually going to work. But then something happened. You remembered the people counting on you, the things only you can do, the responsibilities that don't just disappear because you decided you're tired. And suddenly, doing less didn't feel freeing anymore. It felt irresponsible.
So you added things back. Maybe not all of them, but enough to feel back in control again. Enough to feel like you weren't dropping the ball. And now you're right back where you started. Overloaded, overcommitted, and quietly wondering why something that sounds so simple feels completely impossible to actually do. And if that's you, I want you to be very clear about something from the start. This is not a discipline problem. It's not a time problem, and it's definitely not because you just need better boundaries. The reason doing less feels impossible for type A women is because it's not just a productivity change. It's an identity threat. You're not just someone who gets things done. You're the one people rely on. You're the one who figures it out, steps in, follows through, and makes sure things don't fall apart. That role didn't happen by accident. It was built over years of being capable, reasonable, and dependable in situations where those traits mattered. So when someone tells you to just do less, what your brain actually hears is stop being the person that everyone depends on. And that doesn't feel freeing, it feels dangerous. because your sense of stability, your sense of control, and even your sense of worth are all tied to being that person.
And this is where most advice completely misses the mark. It treats your workload like it's just a scheduling issue. Like if you could just rearrange your calendar or say no a little more often, everything would magically feel better. But your resistance isn't coming from your calendar. It's coming from what those commitments represent. Because for you, doing more isn't just about productivity. It's about being reliable, being trusted. It's about knowing that when something matters, you're the one who can carry it. So when you try to do less, it doesn't just feel like you're dropping tasks. It feels like you're dropping a standard you've held yourself to for a long time. Let's break this down a little more, because how this shows up actually depends on your type A pattern. If you're an overplanner, doing less turns into a strategy problem. You don't just cut things, you analyze them, you reorganize them. You try to optimize your way into a lighter schedule. But instead of actually reducing your load, you end up spending more time managing it. Because the idea of removing something without fully thinking it through feels reckless. So you stay busy, you refine, you adjust, and at the end of the day, nothing has changed. You're just carrying it more efficiently.
If you're a hustler, it shows up completely different. You don't overthink doing less, you reject it. Because your default response to pressure has always been to do more effort, time, energy, because that's what's worked for you in the past. That's what's gotten results. So when things feel heavy, your instinct isn't to pull back, it's to push harder. And the idea of doing less feels like letting up at the exact moment you should be stepping up. So instead of reducing your load, you double down. And for a while it works until it doesn't.
And if you're an avoider, doing less sounds appealing, but not in a productive way. It becomes distance. You don't intentionally choose what to let go of. You just step back from everything that feels too heavy or unclear. And while that might create temporary relief, it doesn't actually solve the problem, because the responsibilities don't go away, they just wait. So eventually you swing back into last-minute intensity trying to catch up on everything you pulled away from. And that cycle, step back, then scramble, is exhausting in a completely different way.
No matter which pattern you fall into, the result is the same. You're carrying more than you should, for longer than you should, without ever really questioning whether all of it is actually necessary. And over time, that creates a very specific kind of exhaustion. Not just physical tiredness, but mental weight. The kind where everything feels important, everything feels urgent, and nothing feels optional. And when everything feels that way, doing less doesn't feel like a smart decision. It feels risky.
That's why you can take a break and still feel tired. You can clear your schedule for a day and still feel overwhelmed. Because the problem isn't just the number of tasks, it's the weight you've attached to them. You're not just managing a workload, you're managing expectations, identity, and the pressure of being the one who holds everything together. And until that shifts, no productivity system is going to fix that. So here's the shift, and it's a subtle one, but it changes everything. The goal is not to do less. The goal is to carry less. Those are not the same thing, because you can have fewer tasks and still feel overwhelmed if you're treating every single one like it's equally important and equally your responsibility. Carrying less means you start questioning what actually belongs to you and what doesn't. Not what can you do, but what you're actually supposed to be responsible for.
That's where the real filter comes in. Instead of asking, what should I remove? You start asking, what actually requires me? Because the truth is, a lot of what you're carrying doesn't require your level of thinking, your level of decision making, or your level of ownership. You've just taken it on because you're capable. And capability is a terrible filter for responsibility. Just because you can carry it doesn't mean it's yours to hold. So let's make this practical. This week, I don't want you to try to overhaul your entire schedule. I don't want you to cut 10 things or suddenly become someone who says no to everything. That's not realistic, and it's not how this actually works. Instead, I want you to look at everything on your plate and ask one question. Does this actually require me? Not my effort, not my attention, me. My judgment, my decision-making, my involvement.
And here's the hard part. You have to answer that honestly, because your default is going to be yes. Of course it needs you. Of course you should handle it. Of course it's your responsibility. But if you slow down and really look at it, you'll start to see that some of those things don't actually require you. They just ended up with you. And that's where the shift begins, not by doing less, but by carrying less of what was never yours in the first place. Because here's what most type A women realize when they finally start letting go of some of that weight. It's not the work that was keeping them stuck.
It was the belief that they had to be the one holding all of it.
And if that's hitting a little too close to home, you're going to want to watch this next video because we're breaking down why you feel like you're the only one who can do things right and how that belief is quietly keeping you overwhelmed.
Make sure you're subscribed because this is exactly the work we're doing here, helping type A women stop carrying everything so they can actually build something that lasts.
We'll see you in the next one. How many times have you said, I'll just do it myself, it's faster? Not because you love doing it, but because explaining it, delegating it, or trusting someone else to handle it feels like more work than just getting it done yourself. And if you're being really honest, it's not just about speed. It's because you don't trust that it will be done the way you would do it.
So you step in, you take it back, you redo it, you clean it up, you make sure it meets the standard. And on the outside, it looks like you're just being efficient, responsible, maybe even helpful. But internally, something else is happening. You're quietly becoming the bottleneck for everything in your life and your business. And the hardest part, it doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like it is the only option. Most people would look at this and say, you just need to let go of control. But that's actually not what's happening here. This isn't about wanting to control everything. It's about you carrying a standard that you don't see consistently met anywhere else. You've built your ability to follow through, to think ahead, to care about the details, and to take ownership seriously. So when something matters, your brain doesn't ask, who could do this? It asks, who can do this well? And the answer it keeps coming back to is you.
And that's why this feels so different than advice you've probably heard before. Because you're not stepping in out of ego, you're stepping in out of responsibility. You're not trying to control the outcome because you want credit, you're trying to control it because you don't want things to fall apart. And there's a big difference between needing control and not seeing another option you trust. And when those two things get confused, you end up feeling misunderstood and stuck. This pattern doesn't start overnight. It builds over time. You step in once because something wasn't done well. Then again because it was easier. Then again because you already knew how. And eventually, without even realizing it, you become the default. Not because anyone assigned it to you, but because you consistently proved that you could handle it. And when you're the one who always handles it, people stop questioning whether they should step in. And you stop questioning whether you should step back.
And here's where it gets tricky. Every time you take something back, you reinforce two beliefs at the same time. First, you confirm to yourself that you're the only one who can do it right. But second, you unintentionally confirm to everyone else that they don't need to step it up because you've got it handled. So the gap gets wider. Your standard stays high, but no one else gets the reps to meet it. And over time, what starts as capability turns into isolation. Because now it's not that just that you're doing everything, it's that you feel like you have to. If you're a hustler, this shows up as speed. You move fast, you execute quickly, and you don't hesitate to jump in when something needs to get done. But because you can do things faster than you can explain them, you default to doing instead of delegating. And over time, your efficiency becomes the very thing that keeps you overloaded. You're not overwhelmed because you're slow. You're overwhelmed because you're too effective at taking things on.
If you're an overplanner, it shows up as standards. You've thought through every detail, every step, every possible outcome. So when someone else approaches it differently, it doesn't just feel different, it feels wrong. Not because they're incapable, but because they're not following the systems you've already built in your head. So instead of letting it play out, you step in early, you adjust, you refine, and once again, you become the one responsible for making sure it's done right.
And if you're an avoider, this shows up as delayed delegation. You know you shouldn't be doing everything, but the thought of handing it off feels overwhelming. It feels unclear, messy, and like something that will create more problems before it solves any of them. So you put it off and you wait until it's urgent. And then instead of delegating, you just do it yourself because now it's faster.
The cost of this isn't just that you're busy. It's that everything in your world becomes dependent on you. Progress slows down not because things aren't happening, but because everything has to go through you first. And that creates a very specific kind of pressure, the kind where you can't step away without things stalling, the kind where even rest feels risky because you know what's waiting when you come back.
And eventually, this starts to affect how you see yourself. You don't just believe that you're capable, you believe that you're required, that things worked because you're holding them together. And while that might feel true in the short term, it's also what keeps you stuck doing everything in the long term. Because if everything depends on you, nothing can grow beyond you. So here's the shift. And again, it's not what most people expect. The goal is not to lower your standards. You don't need to care less, expect less, or settle for work that doesn't meet the mark. The goal is to stop expecting other people to meet your standard without giving them the opportunity to build toward it. Because no one starts where you are. You didn't either.
And that's the part that requires real intention. Letting someone else do something imperfectly isn't failure. It's training. It's how capability is built. It's how ownership is developed, and it's how you stop being the only person everything depends on. But that only happens if you're willing to step back long enough for someone else to step in. Not forever and not for everything, but enough to create space that didn't exist before. So here's what I want you to do this week. Not everything, just one thing. Pick one task you're currently holding on to, not because you love it, but because you don't trust anyone else to do it the way you would. And instead of taking it back, walk someone through it. Let it be slower, let it be imperfect, and let it feel a little uncomfortable.
Because that discomfort is the exact signal that something is changing. It means you're not defaulting to doing. It means you're starting to actually lead. And leadership doesn't look like doing everything right. It looks like creating an environment where things can be done well without always depending on you. Because here's what most type A women realize when they finally stop stepping in every time something isn't perfect. They were never the only one who could do it right.
They were just the only one who never gave anyone else the chance to learn how.
And if that's something you're working through right now, make sure you're subscribed because this is exactly what we're unpacking here.
And if you haven't watched the last video about why you're carrying too much, start there, because this is the next layer of that conversation.
We'll see you in the next one.
Have you ever been around someone who is just completely unbothered? They're not rushing, they're not worried, they're not overthinking anything. They show up late, laugh it off, say it'll work out, and somehow they're totally fine with that. And instead of feeling relaxed around them, you feel irritated. Not just a little annoyed, but deeply uncomfortable because while they're calm, your brain is running through everything that could go wrong. And you're sitting there thinking, how are you not thinking about this?
And if you're honest, it's not just confusion, it's judgment. You start questioning their standards, their awareness, their level of responsibility. You think, someone has to be thinking about this, and clearly it's not going to be them. So what happens? You step in, you plan ahead, you carry the details, and you make sure that nothing gets missed. And now, instead of just being around a chill person, you're responsible for both of you. Most people would look at this and say, it's just a personality difference. Type A versus type B, structured versus relaxed, driven versus easygoing. But that explanation is way too shallow for what's actually happening here because your reaction isn't neutral. It's emotional and it's immediate and strong. That's not just preference, that's a pattern being activated. Because when you see someone operating without urgency or planning, without visible concern, your brain doesn't interpret that as calm, it interprets it as risk.
And that's why this hits deeper than people expect. You're not reacting to them as a person. You're reacting to what their behavior represents to you. It feels like things are being left open, unaccounted for, or ignored. And if you're someone who has built your identity around being responsible, prepared, and aware, that's incredibly uncomfortable to sit in. So it's not that you don't like chill people, it's that their way of operating clashes directly with the way you've learned to feel safe. For a lot of type A women, this didn't start as a personality. It started as a response. At some point, being the one who thought ahead, planned ahead, and handled things well wasn't optional. It was necessary. Maybe things were chaotic. Maybe expectations were high. Maybe you learned early that if you didn't stay on top of things, something would fall through the cracks. So you adapted. You became the one who noticed, who prepared, who followed through. And over time, that didn't just become something you did, it became who you are.
And here's the part that people miss. That adaptation worked. It got results. It created stability, it built trust, and it made you capable in a way that most people aren't. So of course your brain keeps using it. But now when you're around someone who doesn't operate that way, it creates friction because they're not reinforcing the system that you've relied on for so long. They're not scanning for problems. They're not preparing for outcomes. And your brain goes, wait, are we just not going to handle this? And this is where it starts to show up in really practical ways. You're thinking about timing. They're saying, we'll figure it out. You're planning logistics. They're saying, it's not a big deal. You're trying to get ahead of something and they're completely comfortable waiting. And instead of meeting in the middle, what usually happens is you move toward them by taking on more. You don't actually become more relaxed. You just become more responsible.
And this is exactly what people on the outside are reacting to, even if they don't understand it. There's this perception that type A people are anxious, intense, or always making things feel more urgent than they need to be. And I've even seen people say things like, why are you worried about something that's not happening for a week? But what they're missing is this. You're not trying to create pressure. You're trying to prevent problems. Those are two very different things. But from the outside, they can look the same. The tension isn't actually between you and chill people. It's between two different definitions of safety. For you, safety comes from preparation, from thinking ahead, from knowing that things are handled before they become problems. For them, safety comes from flexibility, from trusting that things will work out, even if they're not fully planned.
Neither one is inherently wrong, but when you don't recognize that difference, it turns quickly into frustration. You think they're careless. They think you're too intense. You think they're missing things. They think you're overthinking everything. And both of you walk away feeling incredibly misunderstood because you're not actually solving the same problem. You're operating from completely different assumptions about how things should be handled. So here's the shift, and this is where we reframe type A in the right way. Your tendency to think ahead, plan, prepare, that's not the problem. That's a strength. It's why things get done, and it's why details don't get missed, and it's why people trust you with important things. The problem is when your strength becomes your only mode, when you assume that your way is the only way things can work.
Because the truth is, not everything requires your level of intensity. Not every situation needs to be optimized, solved, or handled ahead of time. When you treat everything like it does, you end up carrying more than you need to. Again, the goal isn't to become a chill person. That's not who you are. The goal is to recognize when your strength is actually needed and when it's just being over-applied. So here's your challenge this week. The next time you feel that irritation rise up, the why are they not thinking about this feeling, I don't want you to immediately step in and take over. Pause and ask yourself, is this actually a problem right now or just something I'm used to solving early?
And if it's not a real problem yet, let it sit. Let someone else handle it their way. Let it be a little less optimized, a little less controlled. Not forever, not for everything, but enough to prove to yourself that things don't always fall apart just because you didn't step in first. Here's what most type A women realize when they start pulling back in these moments. They were never wrong for caring about the details.
They just didn't need to carry every single one of them.
And if this is hitting home, make sure you're subscribed because this is exactly what we're unpacking here.
And if you haven't watched the video on why you're carrying too much, start there because this is another layer of that same pattern.
We'll see you in the next one.